Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Penn Vicarage on this Thursday morning. Lovely to see you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning as we continue our adventure through the book of Exodus. And today we're in chapter 11. So here we go, Exodus chapter 11. Here goes. The Lord said to Moses, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterwards, he will let you go from here. Indeed, when he lets you go, he will drive you away. Tell the people that every man is to ask his neighbour, and every woman is to ask her neighbour for objects of silver and gold. The Lord gave the people favour in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, Moses was himself a man of great importance in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's officials and in the sight of the people. Moses says, Thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go through Egypt. Every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, and the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on the throne, to the firstborn of the female slave who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And there will be a loud cry throughout the whole land of Egypt, such as has never been or will ever be again. But not a dog shall growl at any of the Israelites, not at people, not at animals. So you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all those officials of yours shall come down to me and bow down low to me, saying, Leave us, and all your people shall who follow you. After that I will leave. And in hot anger he left Pharaoh. The Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, in order that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron performed all these wonders before Pharaoh, but the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of the land. And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, just remind you of the context of this reading this morning as we approach this denouement of the story here. Good word, that, isn't it? Anyway, so what's happening is the people of God's people of Israel had been slaves in Egypt under a king called Pharaoh. They got there originally because through Joseph a few years before. And basically, the Egyptians under Pharaoh had made the Israelites slaves and had made it really awful. Pharaoh felt threatened by them and so on, so he made them slaves. Not only that, is when they complained, he made their slave driving worse. He sort of doubled their workload. He also inflicted genocide upon them, killing their firstborn sons, drowning them in the Nile when they were born, and so on. So you've got a really cruel taskmaster in Pharaoh, and he actually, as I say, he did some infanticide or genocide on these children as well. So Pharaoh was not a nice man. The people had cried out to God, and God had cried out, and God had heard them. And then God had said to Pharaoh, said Moses say to Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh had every warning. He'd been told firstly, and Moses had been given signs, and that had meant nothing to Pharaoh. In fact, Pharaoh's magicians thought they could do just as well. And then by a whole series of plagues, which we've heard about in the last 2 or 3 days, came upon the land of Egypt, starting with some fairly minor ones and getting worse and worse and worse. Yesterday we had plague of darkness, and plague on livestock and various other things as well. So things are starting to get really bad in Egypt. But despite that, Pharaoh's heart remained hard, and he would not let God's people go, despite all that. And here we have the next couple of chapters. This and the next couple of chapters, we have the big one, the one which actually breaks the camel's back in the end, so to speak. And what's happening here is there isn't another. It's not just. It reads a bit oddly. It's not that Pharaoh has another meeting with Moses. He doesn't. They'd had their last meeting, but in chapter 11 we're kind of reminded of what the Lord had said in the past. I will bring. The Lord had said to Moses, what you should really read, I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt and so on. So there's one more plague to come, and in a sense, in chapter 11 we have the advance warning, if you like, of the plague that is to come. Now this clearly is we're about to read about in this couple of chapters. It's problematic, it's complicated, it's hard to understand. But what is clear is it's the biggest plague of them all. It's the one which does eventually break the camel's back, as I say. And Pharaoh does ultimately relent, as God says in verse 1 and 2 that he will. This is the one that finally does it. But let me just say a few things about this particular plague which is to come, the plague of the firstborn, which is, as I say, it's difficult to get our heads around. It's hard, but see firstly that it is the biggest plague of them all. This is the one which really hits home. It's the only plague where God does it specifically, and all the others, God sends gnats and they do the business, or God sends frogs and they do the business, or God sends other things. But in this particular one, it's actually God himself who does it. So there's a sense this is directly as an act of God. And it's the one plague which is utterly reversible. Is irreversible as well. All the others you can kind of come back from, but this one there's no way back from. This is the irreversible plague as well. So see, firstly, because it's a direct act of God, and because it's irreversible, it really is the strongest, the hardest plague of all the 10, which God does to Pharaoh and Egypt. So you've got the strength of it first. Secondly, you've got the demonstration of God's power, and God's power over Egyptian gods. So, for example, you've got God's power here over the Egyptian god Osiris, apparently, who was the god of the dead. And here, God is demonstrating his power over life and death. And in the plague on by the death of the cattle as well, apparently cattle were objects of veneration in Egypt at the time. They were considered to be divine. And in a sense, God is showing his power over them as well. So here we have the strength of this plague. You've got God demonstrating his power over, like I said, over Egyptian gods, the god of death, and also the god which is demonstrated by cattle as well. Then you've got also, in a sense, to see also the kind of the way that the plague pans out. It is, as I've explained already this morning, it's a reversal, if you like, of what Pharaoh had done to the Egyptians, had done to the Israelites. He had murdered their firstborn children, and in a sense, you could argue Pharaoh was getting what he had, in a sense, only what he had done to the Israelites. So whereas he had murdered the firstborn child in earlier chapters of Exodus, here we find it happening. In a sense, he gets a bit of a taste of his own medicine, if you like, here in this chapter as well. It's also worth saying that the outcry, which there will be so much crying in Egypt like it's never been heard before, never been heard again. The word for outcry is the same Hebrew word as was used earlier on when God heard the outcry of his people under their slavery in Egypt. So the crying out which the Egyptians do at the loss of their firstborn sons is the same crying that the Israelites said under the slavery that they'd been experiencing in Egypt in the first few chapters here. Notice also that so we've got the strength of it, we've got the power of it. You've got, in a sense, it's a reversal of what Pharaoh had given out to other people. Notice also in this that Pharaoh, you get the impression during this that Pharaoh becomes increasingly isolated in this. That Pharaoh is stubborn. Pharaoh's, he's not going to let these people go under any come hell or high water, you might say. But you very much get the impression that the Egyptians themselves start to change their minds. That they become, Pharaoh, Moses becomes in verses 1 to 3 held in high favour amongst the people of Egypt. And you very much get the impression that the people of Egypt saying to Pharaoh, look, these people have brought enough trouble on us already. For goodness sake, let the people go. We've had enough of this. We don't want these plagues any longer. Get rid of these people. So you very much get the impression that Pharaoh becomes increasingly isolated in his stubbornness here. Then you've got, but the sadness is, of course, that all the people of Egypt, in a sense, that they suffer because of this. And I suppose in a sense that demonstrates, if you like, the importance of having honest people in power. And the fact that actually through sinful actions and our own stubbornness and our own refusal to obey God, other people get caught up in it as well. So when, for example, with people who are bad parents, for example, that has impact on the children. If people and people around them, if people, drive drunk and whatever, and people can get killed on the road, and sometimes innocent people get caught up in it. And there's a sense in which that I think that does happen here. That Pharaoh is the king of Egypt, but his stubbornness has an impact on other people as well. But finally notice, even through the severity, if you like, of this plague of the firstborn, God is quite clear that God is careful in what he does. Notice that they died, but they died quietly. They died in their sleep. And that the crying is very much the cry of mourning, not the death throes of the death, if you like. They didn't die in an agony. These people get the impression these sons died in their sleep. And also, of course, that God was discerning about, none of the people of Israel will die in this. As we discover in the next couple of chapters, that when God judges, God is careful about what God does. So, my friends, this is a complicated chapter. We could debate it for hours, have many hours and many coffees and many late-night Channel 4 discussions about this one. But here we have in chapter 11, having had the 9 plagues already, in a sense, this chapter reminds us of what is to come. this plague of the firstborn children from the sons, which we're going to find out about in the next couple of days. Notice in it, it is the biggest plague of all, and because it's done by God. Secondly, notice God is demonstrating his power over all things, including Egyptian gods, that God reigns supreme. Notice it's a reversal of what Pharaoh had done to the children of Israel. He was getting, in a sense, a taste of his own medicine. Notice, of course, also that the people of Egypt are getting increasingly frustrated, and that Pharaoh is becoming increasingly isolated in his stubbornness. Notice also that the sadness, of course, is that when people behave bad, we need to make sure that another reason for avoiding sin and avoiding stubbornness against God is to make sure that because other people get caught up in it as well, to make sure that we are in tune and being right with God. But finally, notice, of course, God's carefulness, God's discernment in what he does. That this isn't carpet bombing, but God knows what he's doing, and God is careful, and God is God. So it's a complicated chapter, lots to think about, and do reflect on that. My friends, have a lovely day. God bless you. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.